going north. All day, the whiskey car stopped and started at places we couldn't see. More places than we could count, just like August had said. We heard people walking past the car and barrels being rolled and loaded. Me and Harrison and Orty Lee stayed crouched down in the back of the car each time we stopped, in case someone opened the door. But no one did. When we were moving, Orty Lee almost wore out the floor, pacing back and forth. He talked and cracked his knuckles and tapped his fingers on each of the barrels. He told us about all the cars he had been on since running off. A pork barrel car, a lumber car, a baggage car, and this one. Didn't breathe a word again about his master or what he had done.
"Trouble is,"
he said,
"you don't know the direction the car is going when you get on. So one went west instead of north. Another went south and took me all the way back to Cincinnati. Probably would have took me to the fields to pick cotton,"
he chuckled,
"if I hadn't been watching close. And another just sat on the tracks, never moved once."
"This one's going north to the lake," Harrison told him. "That's what we heard in Hillsboro."
"Huh,"
Orty Lee said, chewing on a piece of straw.
"We'll see about that. Maybe we open the door and it's New Orleans."
Harrison said that the cotton fields of the South were dead hot, and if we were going south, the car would be getting hotter and hotter inside, and we would know it. The wind coming through the chinks in the car was cool, cold almost, when we were moving, and it smelled like pastures and fields outside. So Harrison said he was sure we were heading the right direction, north. But Orty Lee kept on worrying and walking all day.
"Thought you said someone was going to come for us and let us out. When they supposed to come?"
he would ask Harrison for the 100th time.
"We've been on this railroad car all day. Where's that lake gone to?"
Didn't matter how many times Harrison told him that we had to wait until dark. Each time the car came to another stop, Orty Lee would ask, "You think we come to the lake yet? You think Kennedy's out there now?" Me and Harrison kept to our own side of the car. Sitting there in the rumbling darkness, I tried to think about Canada. Tried to conjure up a picture of people waiting there for us, the way people wait for visitors. "What do you think it's going to be like?" I asked Harrison. But Harrison closed his eyes and said it was bad luck to talk about things before they happened. I remembered young Mass Seth showing me a silver coin once and telling me that I had to chase him all over trying to take it away. Seemed like Canada was the same as that silver coin. We had chased all over, and now we had almost caught it. I tried to picture what Canada would look like. Tried to picture myself living in a real house and walking around calling Harrison my granddaddy. Or maybe we would live in Chatham with my mama if she had a spare bedchamber. And maybe, if I was free, I could get up some mornings and do what I wanted to, just like young Mass Seth. I could carry 1 or 2 fancy white folks' books in my hands and have a mule to ride and learn to write words like Mr. Keephart. Strange to think about all of that. It made me feel scared and pleased inside at the same time.
"Car's slowing down,"
Orty Lee whispered loud.
"Listen."
The rumbling deepened and lengthened like a horse in a slow gallop. After a string of jolts and pulls, we came to a stop. Only this time, we didn't move on again. The bell stayed silent, and one by one, all the voices outside died away. Seemed like an hour passed, maybe more. It was night outside, we could tell, because the car was pitch black inside. We heard an owl hooting and a pair of tomcats fighting and clawing.
"If this ain't the height of madness,"
Orty Lee said, lying down next to us and flinging his arms over his face.
"They ain't gonna let us out. We gonna shrivel up and die locked in this here railroad."
Harrison didn't say a word. His rigor mortis had set in, bad, from being on the hard floor all day. He was leaning against one wall with his head down on his chest. I could hear him whispering the words of the same song over and over. "Lord, Lord, Lord," he mumbled low. "What do you want me to stay here for? Well, this old world ain't a friend no more. No friend, no more. What do you want me to stay here for?" And then there was the soft sound of footsteps coming around the car. My heart thudded. The latch on our car moved, rattled, and the door creaked a little ways open. I could hear the sound of someone leaning in, breathing. "Tooey, tooey." The person whistled real low. It sounded just like a little night bird whistling. But before me and Harrison could whistle back, Orty Lee jumped up and said loudly,
"We here. Don't go and shut that door. There's 3 of us colored folks hiding in here."
Lord almighty, Harrison hissed. You hush now. It didn't matter because whoever was outside had already heard us. There was a long silence, as if they were waiting, or listening, or maybe thinking about shutting the door and leaving us right there.
You runaways?
A hoarse voice said finally. Sounded like a white voice. We didn't have a single choice but to answer.
Yes.
Harrison heaved a sigh.
We is.
All right, the voice said quickly.
Come out then.
Sliding our hands along the tops of the whiskey barrels, we moved slowly through the darkness toward the door. First Ordie Lee, then me, then Harrison. I could see the night sky and a few pale wisps of clouds through the open square. There were stars out, too. It sent a shiver clear through me. Everything looked exactly the same as my dream in the white folks' church. I remembered leaning over the hole in the church floor and staring at the same stars and the night sky. I remembered how Reverend Pry and Mr. Keephart lowered Harrison into that open square, and how he had floated away from me, spinning and turning and falling in that terrible darkness. I glanced quick at the shadow of Harrison behind me. His fingers curled around my shoulder.
Keep moving,
he said, pushing me forward as if he could hear what I was thinking.
Ain't nothing wrong.
The truth is, the nearer we got to that doorway, the more I could feel something wrong. In my mind, I saw Reverend Pry and Mr. Keephart shaking their heads and giving me that sad, sorry look.
Go on,
Harrison whispered. My heart pounded as we climbed out of the car. Seemed like there was no ground at all, as if the three of us were just jumping down into darkness.
That all of you?
A man stepped out of the shadows of the railroad car. He was a white fella, with hunched-over shoulders and short bow legs. His voice was strange-sounding, sharp.
Yes,
Harrison said. The man shook his head and spit a stream of tobacco into the darkness.
Bad night to come here to Sandusky. Slave catchers' bloodhounds got loose and killed 24 sheep outside of town 2 nights ago. You hear about that?
What? Ordie Lee stared wide-eyed at the man.
Ain't this the North?
I shot a quick look at Harrison, not understanding at all how slave catchers and dogs could be after us. Not when we had come all this way. We had taken railroads fast as the wind. How could bloodhounds still be after us here? The man chuckled real low.
You figured everything in the North was free and clear, huh?
He said, shaking his head back and forth.
Well, now, I'm purely sorry to tell you poor folks that you are in more danger here.
He waved his hand at the darkness.
Than probably anywhere else you run from.
He looked at us. Me, Harrison, and Ordie Lee stood next to the whiskey car like we had been struck dumb by lightning.
See,
the white fellow kept on,
the lake's the last place they can pounce on you and take you back to the folks who own you. That's why. And there's always a bunch of manhunters who watch our boats and make a living doing just that.
He pushed the door of the whiskey car closed.
Don't know what else would have killed those poor sheep if it wasn't some slave catcher's bloodhounds. I ain't seen the bloodhounds myself. That's just what I heard in town, he said. But the other boys on the boat told me not to come here tonight. They said I was going to get myself caught with runaways or torn up by dogs, and I should just leave the colored folks alone.
The man spit into the darkness.
But I ain't afraid of nothing. That's what I told them. See if old Bowlegs doesn't smuggle a few coloreds on board in the morning, I said.
He gave a crooked grin.
I already got 31 of you folks to my name this year. You just follow me to the docks, he said, waving his arm for us to follow. Ain't nothing to fear.
Me and Harrison and Ordie Lee walked behind the man like 3 trembly shadows, not saying a word to each other, just hurrying from one stopping place to the next. All around us were rows of dark sheds, and the air smelled strange and heavy with fish. Ordie Lee stopped suddenly.
You hear that?
He whispered, staring at us wide-eyed. Me and Harrison didn't wait to see what Ordie Lee was looking at in the darkness. We just jumped into the shadows of one of the buildings and crouched against the wall. Then the sound started up again. It was a terrible creaking sound, like 100 old doors opening and closing, or the rattling sound of a haunt's old bones. My neck prickled with goose flesh.
Why'd you stop?
The white fella came over to where we were hiding and looked down at us.
You want to have the bloodhounds find us?
He hissed. Ordie Lee said he wasn't about to go anywhere with that sound.
Ain't you never heard wood boats creaking before? That's the sound they make.
The man spat. He took a hold of Ordie Lee's big arm and pointed up at the sky.
We got an hour or 2 before first cock crow. I can't sneak you on the boats till it's light. You just follow me like I told you.
Don't give me any more reason to stop." He hurried down a dirt path between two of the buildings and ducked into an open doorway. "Gonna hide in here," he whispered. The building smelled of rotted food. As we squinted into the darkness, I could see there were stacks of wood crates, barrels, piles of stove wood, and some things that moved. All around us, small shadows ran along the walls. My heart thudded. Rats. But the man didn't pay any mind to the rats crawling around him. Perching on top of a barrel, he reached into his coat and pulled out a bottle of whiskey. "You never set foot on a big boat before?" he said, taking a long swallow and wiping his hand across his mouth. "You never saw the Mississippi?" Me and Harrison just stood where we were, not saying a word. Seemed as if I could feel those rats running up and down my skin.
"I come from Kentucky,"
Ordie Lee said loudly.
"Took a little skiff across the Ohio River, but I didn't like all that water floating around me. No, sir. Long time before Ordie Lee crosses a river like that again. Long, long time."
He paced back and forth, making little squares as he walked.
"Well, you better get used to seeing some water again," the man chuckled.
"That lake you were going to cross could swallow 100 Ohio rivers and probably still drink up a few more." Leaning his head back, he took a loud gulp of whiskey. "When the land disappears, it'll probably look like the Atlantic Ocean to you." Ordie Lee stopped.
"What? Where's the land go?"
he asked sharp.
"Where do you think?"
The man wagged his head back and forth as if Ordie Lee was as thick as turnips. "You leave the land here behind, and you don't see any more land until you get to Canada." My breath caught in my chest. I remembered how Lily always said, "When we go on to the promised land someday, Samuel, we is going to leave this old tough world behind and not see any more land until we get up there in the clouds."
"How far off is Canada?"
Ordie Lee asked, nodding and unknotting his fingers.
"How long we stay on them boats?"
"Be there by evening with a strong wind," the man said as he took another swallow of whiskey. "Long after nightfall, if it's calm." "Lord," I heard Harrison say under his breath, "let those winds be strong." Through the open door of the shed, the sky grew lighter and lighter, like a piece of dark dye cloth being washed. It was getting close to morning. All around us, there was the sound of wagons creaking down the mud roads between the buildings. Barrels rolled past the doorway, and people talked in sharp, northern-sounding voices outside. But truth is, the closer we got to the break of day, the more my heart pounded. Trouble, trouble, trouble. Harrison cleared his throat and pointed at the door. "It time," he said loudly to the man. The man rubbed his eyes and pushed his hat back on his head like he had been sleeping. "Well, now, could be, but I done this trick 100 times, you know," he said slowly, his words all running together. "All you does is just roll a few of these flour barrels," he patted the side of the barrel he was sitting on, "to the Otter, the same as the other colored folks loading cargo, and you are as good as free. Nobody is going to stop you for working on the docks. I done this trick 100 times, 101 times." He put a finger to his lips. "Shh, just keep hid," he said, grinning at Harrison. "Old Bowlegs will have his little look around." Tucking the whiskey bottle in his coat, he staggered slow and swaying through the open door. After he was gone, Ordie Lee whispered, "You think the three of us gonna be free today, huh? You think we're gonna get to Canada today?" He drummed his fingers on the top of a wood barrel. "You think these barrels gonna get us to freedom? You think that fellow was telling us the truth?" "You hush," Harrison snapped, "for people out there hear you." The man stuck his head through the doorway. "Roll those flour barrels right out here," he said loudly. "Looks fine and clear. Let's load up the cargo, fellas." But I had a strange feeling as Ordie Lee turned 2 barrels on their sides for us to push toward the door. Me and Harrison set our hands down side by side on one barrel. Ordie Lee took the other. Looking down at our brown hands on those flour barrels, I felt my throat tighten, squeezing tighter and tighter. "Hush," a voice whispered in my mind. "Hush, someone's coming." "Don't have all day," the man said, waving. "Come on." Following the man's back, we pushed our barrels out the doorway and down the dusty road to the docks. The smell of fish and the sound of the boats creaking in the wind grew stronger. The road was full of people and carts and wagons. Seemed like we were in the middle of a river of moving things. As our barrels rolled onto the thick wood planks of the docks, my heart jumped. We at the dock already? We this close to freedom after all this time? The barrels rolled hard on the uneven planks. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was loud, too loud. I kept my eyes down, didn't look up at all of the people passing around us, just their shoes. Fancy cloth shoes, old patched shoes, greased work shoes, boots. The boots moved in front of us and stopped. Orty Lee's feet stopped.
Get out your papers,
a hard voice said to us.
Let me see them.
Southern-sounding voice, boot heel hard. Fast, Orty Lee's feet turned and spun around. They lifted off the dock like two blackbirds taking flight, going to freedom all by themselves, but not fast enough. Another pair of boots stepped behind us, and white hands reached out and latched hard onto our arms.
If you run,
the riverman said,
they know exactly who you are.